All right. Hey, everybody. Dr. Sean Talbot here. Hey, I've got a really cool study that I want to talk to you guys about. Very interesting stuff. So we talk here in this channel a lot about the gut microbiome and how it influences mental wellness. We talk about the gut-brain axis and how that can, modulating what happens in the gut, the second brain can really determine in large part how you feel in your first brain in terms of your mood and your energy levels and your resilience and all that kind of stuff. What I want to talk to you about today, though, is another way of thinking about the signals that are going across this axis. So this paper came out just a couple of months ago. It was published in a journal called Translational Psychiatry. You can see it here. I'm going to post this highlighted version. I'm going to post it up into our community area. So Translational Psychiatry. It came out October last year. So just a couple of months ago. And really cool premise. They looked at the oral microbiome, your mouth microbiome, and how that impacts mental health. So we've known for a long time that the oral microbiome is related to inflammation, it's related to mental health, it's related to things like Alzheimer's. So if you have problems in your mouth, like you've got gingivitis or periodontitis, where you have an infection in your mouth, that infection can actually pass into the brain and lead to dementia. It can lead to inflammation in the brain, what we call neuroinflammation. It's been known for a while that dementia and neurodegenerative problems are related to problems in the oral cavity. But this is one of the first studies that is used a large population of people to look at the difference between what's happening in the mouth, oral microbiome, and comparing healthy people to people with mental wellness problems, such as depression and anxiety and PTSD and things like that. So, like I said, I'm going to post a copy of this paper up for you guys to read all the details, but I want to give you a highlight here. So this article, Probing the Oral-Brain Connection, explores the relationship between the oral microbiome and mental health in a pretty large cohort. So the full title, Probing the Oral-Brain Connection, Oral Microbiome Patterns in a Large Community Cohort with Anxiety, Depression, and Trauma Symptoms, PTSD, and Periodontal Outcomes. Why is it interesting? It's interesting for, first of all, from the standpoint that globally, depression and anxiety are the leading cause of disability around the entire world. If you added everybody up around the world that has some symptom of depression, some symptom of anxiety, not really like debilitating diseases like major depressive disorder or generalized anxiety disorder, we're talking about, the number is 582 million people around the world. That's over 500 million people that are struggling with mental wellness issues, and even more and more people since the COVID pandemics and things like that. But we're all at risk for these problems, right? Think about the risk factors for us having any problems with mental wellness, even if it's just like garden variety stress. We're all stressed out. We are exposed to a lot of highly processed foods and standard American diet and Western style eating patterns and things like that. There's a overuse of antibiotics, right, which kill the gut microbiome, but also kill the skin microbiome and kill the oral microbiome. And so if you're damaging the microbiome, you're damaging this whole signaling system, and that could lead to mental wellness problems. We're all exposed to more pollutants in the air, in our water, in our environment in general. So, there's lots and lots of stresses on our bodies and minds. So it's no wonder that there are lots and lots of problems in these areas. And, we've known for a long time the relationship, at least a decade of the relationship between the gut-brain axis and how that affects mental well-being. And now we're starting to get data about the oral brain axis or the mouth brain axis and how that impacts mental well-being. So before we get into the actual study to find out what they did and what they found, let's talk about theoretically, what could be going on here. So, if you think about some of the underlying mechanisms where we talk about the gut-brain axis or even the heart-brain axis, we're talking about some sort of a signal being sent from one place and that signal being picked up at another place. So when we're talking about the gut, we're talking about serotonin and dopamine and GABA and short-chain fatty acids. When we're talking about the heart, we're talking about different electrical rhythms, and we can measure heart heart rate variability and things like that. What could be going on here in the mouth that could be transmitted to the brain and thereby influence, some aspect of mental health, like, your mood or your level of tension or your level of resilience or any of that kind of stuff? Well, it could be cytokines. So cytokines are cellular signaling molecules. You can get one cell to produce a cytokine, and that cytokine will travel to the other cell and send a signal. And, those cytokines are typically thought of in the realm of being inflammatory signals or anti-inflammatory signals. All cells can make these cytokines, but a lot of the cytokines come from the immune system. A lot of the cytokines will influence the immune system. So whenever we're talking about cytokines, we're talking about signaling, we're talking about immune system regulation, and we're talking about inflammatory balance. And so there are several species of bacteria in the mouth that are cytokine producers. Some can produce anti-inflammatory cytokines, some can produce inflammatory cytokines. And the reason that we think it might be cytokines with the oral microbiome is because, reason why this is potentially important, is that cytokines can go everywhere in the body. They can travel from the gut into the blood. They can affect the immune system. They can affect your HPA axis, your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, your fight or flight response, which can further influence your production of stress hormones like cortisol. They can influence your alertness level. So if your cytokine levels are too high at night, it'll interfere with your sleep. Cytokines can cross the blood-brain barrier, which is a really, really important concept. So whether those cytokines are made in the gut, or they're made in the immune system, or they're made by the bacteria in the mouth, they have the potential to get across into the brain, whether you have a good blood-brain barrier or not. Like they're allowed to go in there, and then they interact with the immune system in the brain, called the glial network. They can interact with the neurons themselves. They can lead to neuron breakdown or neuron protection, depending on the flavor of cytokine that you have. So it could be cytokines. We know that there's a relationship between cytokines and mood state. We know that if you have too many inflammatory cytokines getting across into the brain, that will lead to something called neuroinflammation. And neuroinflammation is a red flag for leading to depression and anxiety. So it could be that, if you have something going on in the mouth, inflammation in the mouth, red gums and, what we would call gingivitis, that inflammation can be passed throughout the whole body, but that inflammation could be passed directly to the brain and lead to some of these problems. And previous studies have shown that higher levels of inflammation lead to more depression, more anxiety, more PTSD. So cytokines, that could be the first part. The other piece of it is that there are a number of species of bacteria in the mouth that are metabolizers of tryptophan. So tryptophan is the amino acid that is the precursor for serotonin. And if you don't have the right level of serotonin, you're going to be not happy, right? Serotonin is sort of the neurotransmitter of happiness. And so if there's a change in your tryptophan metabolism, you're either not metabolizing it into serotonin, or you're metabolizing it too quickly, so you don't have enough serotonin. That could lead to a change in the ratio between tryptophan and serotonin, and that can lead to a mental wellness problem. So it could be that. It could also be if you just have a functional or a structural impairment in your mouth. So let me explain it this way. We know that if you have a structural impairment in your gut, what we would call leaky gut, you could also call it, excessive gut permeability. There are things that should stay in the gut that don't stay in the gut because they're able to leak across into your circulation. When that happens, it sets off an inflammatory reaction. It sets off an immune system reaction. That immune system reaction leads to more inflammation. Those inflammatory cytokines get up into the brain, lead to neuroinflammation, et cetera, et cetera. So leaky gut will lead to more anxiety, more depression, more trauma, less resilience, more agitation, less ability to relax, heightened fight or flight response. So you don't want to have a leaky gut. The same thing could be happening though in the mouth. We could be seeing leaky mouth leading to the same exact cascade of biochemistry. You have a bleeding gums, and the bacteria can get across through that leaky mouth into the bloodstream. That sets off an immune system reaction, sets off inflammation. That inflammation travels to the brain, leads to neuroinflammation, et cetera, et cetera. The bacteria themselves could get into the bloodstream, and bacterial cell walls have something called LPS, lipopolysaccharide, that can set off an immune system reaction, set off an inflammatory reaction. But if those bacteria actually, and that LPS actually gets across the blood-brain barrier, that can lead to an immune system reaction and inflammatory reaction in the gut. So it could be just the signal of the cytokine getting across the blood-brain barrier. It could be the actual bacteria and the LPS that gets across. But this idea of leaky gut, leaky mouth, leaky brain could be, the similar mechanism here. So, it could be cytokines, it could be tryptophan metabolism, it could be leaky, barrier integrities. And that's what this study wanted to go and look at and see what's going on here. What's the relationship between the oral microbiome and mental well-being? And so what did they do? What did they find? So they got a very large cohort of people. They got just over 306 subjects that had mental wellness issues. So there were some that had depressive symptoms. There were some that had anxiety symptoms. There were some that had trauma symptoms, PTSD. And they compared those to 164 healthy controls. So people that didn't have any mental wellness symptoms at all. So they did saliva samples. They got the bacteria in saliva samples. When we're studying the gut microbiome, we have to get fecal samples, right? So we take a poop sample from people, and we measure the microbiome in that fecal sample. Here, because it's the mouth, you're able to just get a saliva sample, and you can analyze all the bacteria there. So they were able to analyze that, measure all the bacteria, and first thing they found, which I thought was really interesting, is that they did not find a relationship between the overall diversity of the bacteria in the oral microbiome and any mental wellness symptom. And that I thought was curious because studying the gut microbiome, we know that having a higher diversity microbiome is protective for mental wellness problems. So if you have a higher diversity microbiome, you generally have, a better mood and a better ability to relax, and you're calmer and you're less tense and you're less confused. So your mental focus is better and you're more resilient. They didn't find that with this. And they talked about it in the discussion section, saying that, other studies have found that relationship, and in this study they didn't. And part of the reason might be, there's a lot of sort of noise in the oral microbiome or any microbiome measurement. There's also a lot of noise in terms of how people present with mental wellness issues, right? No one person with, who has depressive symptoms is the same as the next person with depressive symptoms, and the same with anxiety, and the same with trauma, and the same with garden variety stress, right? It's all kind of unique to the individual. Let me say it this way. What stresses me out might be completely different than what stresses you out, right? So that difference in how we perceive our overall mental wellness could be something where they just didn't pick this up in the particular analysis that they did. But what they did find, which was really interesting, is they found very close associations between specific categories or particular types of bacteria and different mental wellness outcomes. So I actually had to write them down here, right? Whenever we're talking about bacteria, they have all these names that are really, really hard to pronounce. And so, sometimes we have to work through it to figure out what we're talking about. So this study found a distinct relationship between, let's see here, so people with PTSD had higher levels of a particular bacteria called Prevotella histicola and a lower level of a bacteria called Haemophilus sputorium. Let me unpack that a little bit, right? It doesn't mean that if you have those bacteria, you're automatically going to have PTSD. What it means is that those bacteria are higher in people who have PTSD, right? Relative abundance of those two, relative abundance of Prevotella was higher, and of Haemophilus was lower. So there's a separation there of those two bacteria. These are bacteria that are known to be metabolizers of tryptophan. So this is one of the reasons that we think tryptophan and serotonin might be related here. But there's a lot of different species of Prevotella in the oral microbiome and in the gut microbiome. People who eat lots of plants, vegetarians, vegans, people who eat lots of whole grains will have a lot of Prevotella in their gut, and generally that's a good thing. But here they found that a high level of this one particular Prevotella histicola, was higher PTSD. Now this other one, this Haemophilus sputorium, lower levels of that were associated with PTSD. So one is high, leading to PTSD. One is low, leading to PTSD. So and they both are involved in tryptophan metabolism. So that gives us a clue, a signal of underlying what's going on in that particular category. Anxiety was a little bit different. So anxiety correlated with reduced Neisseria elongata. That's one species of bacteria. And anxiety was also associated with increases in another kind of bacteria called Orobacterium. And what was the subspecies? It was Orobacterium saccharolyticum. So a sugar eater is what that means. Again, we're looking at, here's this mood state, and in people who have that mood state, in this case anxiety, one kind of bacteria was higher in those individuals. One kind of bacteria was lower in those individuals. And when they did a measurement called, so we can measure the bacteria, right? I refer to that as who's there. What are the species of bacteria that are present? You can also do an analysis called a functional analysis, where you're trying to figure out what are those bacteria doing. So who's there and what are they doing? So you can have a change in bacteria, but if they're not producing something like a serotonin or a short-chain fatty acid or something like that, you don't really know what's going on, right? Are they just there and something else is going on and they're taking advantage of whatever the situation is, or are they actually causative of the situation going on? So in a functional analysis, you're looking at the metabolism. And in their functional analysis, they really looked at, or they really uncovered that tryptophan metabolism might be the underlying piece of biochemistry here that plays a role in this linkage between the oral microbiome and the brain and the mental wellness levels. And what they did was they looked at what these bacteria are known to do. They also looked at levels of serotonin and tryptophan in the blood. And yes, indeed, they found there was a relationship between the tryptophan metabolism bacteria, the ratio of tryptophan and serotonin in the blood, and the people who had the symptoms, the mental wellness symptoms, had lower levels of serotonin in the blood. So that's, again, sort of stitching all this together. Who's here? What are they doing? Functionality. What could the cascade of that signaling look like across the blood-brain barrier? There's only one problem with this kind of functional analysis. We don't necessarily know what's happening to brain serotonin levels. So in this example, they're measuring serotonin in the blood. We can also measure serotonin in the gut. But we talk here a lot about, you might have 90% of your serotonin made in the gut. That serotonin isn't getting into the bloodstream and isn't getting up into the brain. So these distinct pools of serotonin are signals that might say that this other tissue is also changing its metabolism, but you're not actually measuring serotonin levels in the brain. So it's all sort of like supposition in a sense. But what I love about this trial is that it gives us a large cohort looking at specific kinds of bacteria in the oral category, or in the oral cavity, and it's really giving us yet another potential tool to help people with their overall mental wellness, right? There's things we can do in the gut, and we talk about them all the time. We talk about, eating more fiber and, eating prebiotics and even supplementing with different psychobiotic strains of bacteria to change what's happening in the gut, to change what's happening in the brain. We might eventually get there. Well, we definitely will get there. I don't know how long it's going to take for us to get there, but this kind of work is going to allow us to get there by finding out what's happening in the mouth. We might be able to develop a microbiome toothpaste or a mouthwash or, something like that can change the microbiome here in the gut, or here in the oral cavity, so that we get different signals, right? Less of the inflammatory cytokines and more of the anti-inflammatory cytokines. Maybe we can nourish the tryptophan metabolizers so we're making more serotonin. Maybe we can, do mouth rinses that will help to strengthen the barrier function of the mouth, similar to what we would do, and strengthen the barrier function of the gut. So, no more leaky gut, no more leaky mouth, no more leaky brain. We feel better, So, this could be something that is eventually therapeutic for people who have depression and anxiety and PTSD, but it could also be protective. It could be imagine you could have a feel-good mouthwash where you rinse with it and it changes the bacteria, it changes their functionality, they send better signals up to the brain, and you feel less stressed out. Or you do it before you go to bed and you feel less agitated and less anxious, and you're able to get a good night's sleep. So these are all things that the science tells us, the basic science. We have all this information, and then we can try to apply it to our lives. So I thought you might find that interesting. The oral microbiome and mental health. It adds to our things that we might be able to do for people later on down the line. Okay, I'll see you next time. Bye bye.